We're working with quotes from Pema Chodron. She is the queen of living with uncertainty and not being able to get our feet on the ground, and how that's actually the way that it works in our human life. So, this quote, having compassion starts and ends with having compassion for all of those unwanted parts of ourselves, all of those imperfections that we don't even want to look at. So, these three images here, one is younger people who are drinking and driving and partying it up in a car. That's certainly something that was a big part of my life for many years as a teenager. Looking at our body, touching our body. And I think anyone who's ever been around children or grandchildren, no matter how well regulated we are, we still have memories of yelling at them. And the way the negativity bias works is that that tends to be what we think about when we go into working with this. We've all heard this expression, people are doing the best they can from their level of awareness. Accept people for who they are. This is a quote from Deepak Chopra, although I've heard it many other places as well. So one of the things that comes to my mind when I look at that is from their level of awareness. And we can feel a lot of different emotions about that. We can feel judgment and shame, like, well, I should have been more aware. And that's one of the ways that we can work with this. When we look at the way people are, oftentimes they're causing pain. If we look at someone who's really judgmental, for instance, and every time we're around them, we kind of shrink back, or maybe they put us into a fight response. Okay, we would suffer less. We would definitely suffer less if we accepted them for who they are. And that's a hard practice. I don't think it's something that's an on-off switch. I think it's something that we can cultivate acceptance for people, who they are, and also, of course, for ourselves. So as we look back, and I think we can see this in our own lives as well as we look back at our parents. So when our parents were young and they just had us, if we have some kind of understanding of what their emotional, mental, and financial and worldly life capacity was, we can often see that, number one, they didn't have the trauma education and the psychological environment that we're in now. So they often probably felt pretty alone. I know when I was a young parent, I can look at that. And one of the things that I didn't know anything about at the time was how common it is that step parenting is hard for the step parent and the young person, the child. And that there's a lot of difficulty in that and often abuse. And about 10 years after I was in that situation, I started to see books about it. I thought, wow, I really wish I'd had that heads up. I wasn't kind of at the head of that wave. So we can look back at our life and look at it and say, I really wish I'd gotten out of that relationship, or I wish I'd had less of a fight response, or I wish I'd seen that more clearly, all of the different things we might look back at. And we need to do that in the context of the culture at the time, and also whatever was going on in our own personal development. We talk a lot about the negativity bias in our nervous system, how our nervous system will always go better safe than sorry. If we see a look on somebody's face that reminds us of a contemptuous look, for instance, in the past, we're going to react to that. We have that negativity bias in the nervous system, and we also have it in terms of looking back at our life. And that's something I wasn't really thinking about until I started really working with this over the last month or two. We really do only see, or mostly see, the negative unless we really focus in on making that a more balanced perspective. We feel the negative and then we get stuck in shame and then we get disconnected and we can't move. We're not really able to access our higher level functioning either when we're in shame. So, a couple of examples, and I've heard this so many times. Someone will say, yeah, I've been eating really healthy all week. And, I've been making these great salads and wonderful veggies. But then I blew it on Friday night. I had like 6 cookies. And it's not a balanced picture. What they did was eat mostly healthy all week. The same as when you think about a relationship with a child. You think about the time you lost your temper with them. And that overcomes or overshadows hundreds, thousands of times when you had a really wonderful connection with them. All the caring, all the love. So we come back to this. We need to have a compassionate but realistic view of human beings and what our capacities are. And even though we're really working hard at healing and growing, it's not an instant process and it hasn't been true for most of our lives. So, what we could do now is to see it and stop judging ourselves. I thought we could pause here and do a bit of reflection. If you wince when you look back at your life, part of it is because you think you should have done something different than you did. Some of this has to do with our nervous system. When we think about why didn't I stand up for myself, it might be why did I go into fawning and compliance? It might be why didn't I go into a fight response or run away from that? But our nervous system, that unconscious assessment in our nervous system, was that the most likely chance of survival was freeze. So we can't overwrite what the nervous system comes up with, although we could now have more awareness of that. But at the time, especially, we're always doing what our nervous system is activating in us or triggering us to do. How could I have stayed in that relationship is another example. At the time when we got into the relationship, or perhaps when we were staying when it wasn't healthy for us, there was something that was keeping us there. We felt safe, we felt seen, and it blinds us to everything else that was going on. I think if there's a theme song for this, it's clarity. We need to be able to see the truth, and our nervous system really gets in the way. One of the things that happened for me was I had a really bad experience when I was 12, and it colored the whole rest of my teen years. And I got drunk a lot. I got stoned whenever there was drugs around. I had no self-preservation around that. I just wanted to escape what was going on. So some people have something like that. Some people have a home situation, which is really scary and distressing. And we find people that we can connect with. In a way, getting drunk and partying like that is a flight response. But it was also very dysregulating and really risky. And as we look back at that, it's not helpful to go, well, you were a jerk because you did that. It's much better to look at why was I doing that? What was going on in my social life, in my personal life, my emotional life, that was the option that seemed like it was the best one. Let's take a couple of minutes here and see what comes up for you around that. And as you're bringing it up, what's the second part of that? What is a way that you could understand that that's not shaming? And as you're doing that, remember to breathe, stay in your body. If you find you're getting into a shame pose, sit up straight, bring your eyes up, take a couple of breaths, maybe do a breathing practice like cyclic sighing. Stay in connection as you're doing this. These three sentences at the bottom are all shaming. Why didn't I know better? What was I thinking? What was the matter with me? So we could answer those from a trauma educated perspective. What is it that you were trying to accomplish? What is it that you were trying to avoid? What connection were you looking for? What was really going on? And then let's go into the inquiry. Whatever it is that you were just bringing up and looking at, choose something, not a 10 out of 10. See if you could pick a mid level intensity as we go into this. And as we do this, really try to remember you are not your past or your past behavior. When we get into these situations of being shamed, in our culture, there's a lot of toxic shame where we shame, you should be ashamed of yourself. And that's not accurate and it's certainly not kind. But it's not the way it works. We're actually not our past. We're not our past behavior. Even though some of that behavior can be hard for us to look at and to accept, yeah, I really did do that. So see if you can keep yourself in kind connection as we look at this. This is difficult. Bring up an image of yourself. How old were you? What was going on? What did your hair look like? Where did you live? Bring up an image of yourself at that time. And notice how it feels in your body when you remember what it was like for you when you were in your mid 20s or whatever age it is that you're working with. One of the things I see is how innocent I was and how I really didn't know how it worked. Didn't have anyone parenting me either, so I didn't have any guidance in that. So that might be something that's going on as you're looking at this too. You might be seeing in a different way, perhaps. If you find you're going into shame, really stay out of the shame pose. Do some breathing, pull back from this if you want. Certainly, you could put that image into a frame. Notice the space on the outside. Take your eyes around the outside of the frame. Use the tools we have to stay regulated as you're doing this. And what would you want them to know? What do you know now that you didn't know then? And if you could go back in time and have a conversation with them, what is it that you would want them to know? It might be something about the inner critic. Don't be so mean to yourself. And when you have that inner critic come up, find a way to stop it. Tell it to shut up. Or also look at it's not fair to be that mean to yourself. It's not based on reality. And if you feel like there's some part of you at that age, or maybe some behavior that was really unacceptable, see if you could bring that part of you that feels unacceptable into your open heart. You could make eye contact with them in a mental kind of a visualization. Imagine that you're sitting there talking to them at the kitchen table or something. I know you feel really bad about that. Looking back, you really regretted that you stayed in that relationship or that you did that thing. What would you say to them? I understand how sad you feel about that, how much regret you have. And what would they say? And at the time when I was doing some of that behavior that I'm not so happy with now, I wasn't really aware. I wasn't very conscious of it. They might not have that view of it. It might be more from your present day self. You're looking at it and going, I really feel ashamed of what I did back then. And keep it behavior based. It's not you, it's your behavior. I really would do it differently now. And now that I know better, I do better. So that saying that Maya Angelou made so popular is true. When we know better, we do better. One of the really toxic things we do to ourselves, and part of this is the negativity bias, is that we forget about all the wonderful things. So let's finish this inquiry by going there for a few minutes. When you look at some of the behavior that you regret, what else was going on in your life? As a single mother, I did a lot of things right. I made a lot of sacrifices. I really enjoyed time with my child. There's a lot of things that I did right. So, what comes up for you? If you look back on it with a more balanced view, what would you say your strengths are? What kind of joy did you experience? Can you bring that side forward? What are you proud of? And this one might be a little bit harder to bring up. Take a moment to really feel into that. Bring it up with some detail. Who was around? Where did you live? What did you look at? What did you look like? What is the situation there? Let yourself feel that. Take some deeper breaths. This is part of us too. And we come back to life is complicated. Human beings are complicated. And we have this standard that we feel we're supposed to live up to of always being perfectly wise and regulated and kind, doing the right thing. And that is not how it works for anyone. Do we have room in our heart for all of ourselves? And the answer to that might be, I don't think so. Or, yeah, I like to, but I still feel like I have a big inner critic going on. We could afford to be honest. We don't have to pretend something that's not true. If you want, you could put your hands on your heart and bring forward your intention to cultivate kindness, compassion, more of a reality based relationship with yourself where you remember the good as well as the things that are harder to remember. Take a few deep breaths. And imagine looking at yourself back then or looking at yourself in a mirror now. Just allow yourself to feel you're okay as you are. We all have things we regret, and that's not who we are. We're more than our actions. We could afford to be kind.